Welcome, everyone. This is a special time for Florida end-of-life doulas to gather and have a bit of an educational program with Dennis Shuman of Final Friends. He's here in Gainesville. We have people from all around the state joining us today. And I would just like to start by saying that as an end-of-life doula, you know how they say the shoemaker's children have no shoes? Well, I still feel unprepared as far as if I were to die today, would my family and everybody know what to do? So the other night, as my husband and I were laying in bed getting ready to go to sleep, I asked him, and it kind of dropped this suddenly on him, but I said, if you wake up in the morning and I'm dead, what will you do? And he kind of paused for a second, and then he says, I'll go out to the car and I'll get that pile of papers that you gave me. And that was so cute. But, that includes my living will, which will no longer be in effect, and my, other healthcare surrogate, which will no longer be in effect. And so I realized that the papers that he has in his car do not suffice for what he would need if I was dead tomorrow. So that's when I thought, let's just go ahead and get Dennis to share with us again, because I've heard him speak several times and I still feel like I need a refresher. And so now we'll go to speaker view and we'll put on Dennis Shuman of Final Friends.
Hi, thanks for inviting me. And I know that I really don't know what everybody really wants to learn today. So I'm going to do a short introduction and then leave it mainly for questions. So that way I'll make sure I can cover what everybody wants to hear about. Because you already have some background in this area, so I don't want to be too much detail about things you don't need to know. Okay, so a home funeral is when a family and or friends of the person take possession of and take care of the body of a loved one from the time the person dies until final disposition, which is usually either burial or cremation. So basically, family or friends take the place of the funeral home. It bypasses the funeral industry. It's very safe, it's very easy, it's very meaningful for everybody involved. That you know probably already. It is totally legal in the state of Florida, and which means that anybody who wants to be handled by a home funeral has that right, whether the people around know it or not. If they don't, then they just need to be educated. It's not a reason to not do it. Embalming, as you probably know, is totally not necessary. The activities incorporated into a home funeral usually will be the previously expressed wishes of the deceased and the preferences of the family and friends. So, it could mean having the body at home for a while, but not necessarily. It could just be transporting a body from, say, a hospital to a burial ground. That's the basic idea of what a home funeral is. So I'm going to go over a few key points in it. To have a home funeral, you work with a particular office called the Office of Vital Statistics in the Florida Department of Health. And every county has its own Office of Vital Statistics, but it's a state office. So the laws apply to all the counties, they're the same laws. Now, if a person who is still alive knows they want to have a home funeral, they can put it in writing that they want to have a home funeral and put in writing who they would like to be their acting funeral director. So the acting funeral director is part of the legal hoops that you jump through. One person has to be the acting funeral director. And just like you could have a health surrogate designated, you could have your acting funeral director designated before you die. Our website, finalfriends.org, one page is a legal form to designate the acting funeral director. It was done by a lawyer, so that's an easy way to do it if you want to do that designation. The acting funeral director doesn't really have to know what they're doing as long as they have somebody who does know what they're doing to make sure everything is done in a proper and legal fashion. And that's where our group Final Friends comes in. But anybody who knows how to do it can help a family do it to make sure it's done within the bounds of the law. So one of the things to keep it in the bounds of the law is somebody has to be the acting funeral director, as I said. Now, if a person dies and the family and friends want to have a home funeral, but this, not the deceased never specified what they wanted, that can still be done as long as the person who's second in command, which is usually a family member, but there's a whole line of who would be in charge. If there are multiple, let's say there are multiple children, and the children don't agree as to what should be done, that usually creates a little bit of a mess. So it's best if families get these things clear, especially if they're going to be multiple voices once the person is gone. Okay, another thing besides designating the acting funeral director in advance, which can be done but doesn't have to be done, is to gather the information needed to do the certificate of death. Now, the certificate of death, you're probably familiar with it, but it's a form that looks like this, nice legal paper, 8.5 by 14 inches, and it has to be filled out, and it cannot be filled out by hand, but it's not insurmountable. It can be done on a typewriter, but it has to be done very carefully because whiteout is not allowed. If you make a mistake, it's not valid, and you got to start over from scratch. And you got to get a blank form from the Office of Vital Statistics, and they'll only give you a single form at a time. So you got to be careful. However, in the state of Florida, if you're interested, our group, Final Friends, will do it for you. We can create a full certificate of death for anybody in the state. We don't charge for that service. And, so if somebody wants to do it and they want somebody to do the death certificate for them, we do that. And let me tell you, getting this paperwork done is the biggest hurdle of the whole process. So the way it works is the whole top part to here, the whole top from here to here is biographical information. And that biographical information, it's good to get that information in a file in advance so it doesn't have to be searched for in the last minute, because once a person dies, things get really nuts. So you want to, if possible, have this stuff prepared in advance. And anybody who would like to know what's on here, Final Friends has created a questionnaire that has all the questions to do a certificate of death, and it's a PDF file. And if you just email me or Final Friends, I will send you the PDF file, and then you'll have the information, all the information you will need to acquire to do a death certificate. So that's the death certificate, the top part, the biographical information. The bottom part is what the doctor has to fill in, the cause of death. Now, that's done by the doctor, and he doesn't have to use a typewriter. The doctor is allowed to fill it out by hand, the cause of death. So that's another step in the process, and that can be worked on in advance. Just for the sake of consistency, I'm going to do the whole paperwork thing, and then I'll talk about some of the other factors. So the way the paperwork works is this. The certificate of death has a lot of information on it, but one of the things it has on it is the date of death. Therefore, it cannot be completed until the person dies. So once the person dies, there's a little bit of a rush to get it done because you got to get it done, and then you got to go find the doctor to sign off on the cause of death. And then you got to, once the doctor signs off on it, when I say you, I'm referring to the acting funeral director. The acting funeral director would have to do these things. So the acting funeral director would then take it from the doctor after it's signed, bring it to the Board of Health, the Office of Vital Statistics. They take it and they give in return another piece of paper called the Burial Transit Permit. So those are the only two pieces of paper you're going to be concerned with, the death certificate, and then when you turn that into the state, they give you the Burial Transit Permit. That piece of paper allows you, or the person who's holding it, to drive the deceased, the dead body, in their personal vehicle. Totally legal if you have this piece of paper. Not only that, but then when you get, let's say, to the cemetery, you give it to the cemetery, and that allows them to bury the person. They cannot bury the person unless you have that same paper. That's why it's called Burial Transit Permit. Okay, that's the paperwork. Now, so, Shanti, you mentioned in the very beginning, what would your husband do if he woke up and you were dead? And the answer is, in that kind of situation where it's like not expected, you got to call 911. You got to call the police. That's the first thing you have to do. Now, it's good to avoid that, and the way you avoid that is if you're under hospice care. If you're under hospice care, you don't have to call 911. You just call hospice. But now, of course, if a person dies in a hospital, there's no problem. The doctor in the hospital will sign the death certificate. If the person dies at home under hospice care, no problem. The hospice doctor will sign the death certificate. But if the person dies at home for no reason, who's going to sign the death certificate? Nobody knows the cause of death. Therein lies the problem, which is why you have to call the police, because it's possible you were killed. That's, they don't know, nobody knows. It might have been, something like murder. So what happens is the state, if it's not clear why a person dies, the state takes possession of the body, goes to the medical examiner, and the medical examiner does what is necessary to determine cause of death. Once that happens, it's usually a little tricky to get the body back and have a home funeral. If you have to try to get the body back from the state, I'm not saying it can't be done, but that would be a huge obstacle. Okay, so it's good to be under a doctor's care when you die. Now, of course, if you die like in an automobile accident, it's not a problem because, number one, it's pretty clear, you died from the impact, unless they suspect, drugs or something like that, and then they have to take you back and test you. But if they don't suspect, if there's no reason to suspect you, then the people on the scene, the doctor on the scene will sign the death certificate. Or if you're still alive and they rush you to the hospital, but you die there, then somebody there. So the reason I go over this so much is because getting the doctor's signature is a critical part of being able to have a home funeral. Okay. Transporting the body. As I said, once you have the transit permit, it's legal to transport a body in your own vehicle. There are two provisions. One is the body has to be horizontal, and the second provision is the body has to be in a leak-proof, odor-proof bag. The horizontal position is easily accomplished with so many vehicles today. Any vehicle that has a hatchback and the rear seats fold down is totally suitable, or anything like that. We're just enough room. So that's the non-issue. The bag, body bags, Final Friends has a stock of body bags. If somebody's going through us, we will sell them for what we paid online for them, which is, I think, like $26 or something for a bag. It turns out it's a good thing that we have a supply of them, because right now it's so hard to get them because of the pandemic. There's been a run on body bags, and it's almost impossible to get them. But we have them, and I'd be happy, to share if anybody needs. But you can get them online. That's how I got them, Amazon. They're like emergency bags. It's a plastic bag with a zipper, and it has 6 handholds, 3 on each side. So it makes it really easy to carry a body. So a body bag is required legally to transport the body. However, if you don't have a body bag, you can legally do it with Visqueen, which is, just plastic wrap and duct tape, and do it like you would do a burrito, and then, it makes it leak-proof, odor-proof. You've satisfied the law, and it's legal. A little more complicated, but in a pinch, it can be done that way. So, I said that you need the doctor's signature. The person dies in a hospital, that's pretty easy. However, a lot of places don't know that people have the legal right to take possession of their own deceased. And you might go to a hospital figuring, you're going to do this, and they're going to say, no way. So it's very important to talk to whoever you're dealing with, whether it be the hospice people or the hospital or whatever. Let them know way in advance what you're planning on doing. And if they say no way, then you have time to educate them. And they'll always be educated because the law is on your side. It just sometimes is a matter of time. As an example, last year, there was a woman who died at Shands, and Shands refused. They said it's against their policy and they're not going to allow it. And it took me 2 weeks to change their mind, and they officially changed their policy. Because once I present them with the legal information and I show them that, it's everybody's legal right to do it, they have nothing to stand on. They just didn't know it. It's an unknown. It's like one of those secrets in our culture perpetuated by the funeral industry for their own benefit. By the way, I'm not going to get into detail, but the funeral industry didn't even exist in this country until the end of the Civil War. And it served its purpose during the Civil War, but then stayed around and took over because prior to that, there was only home funeral. There was no such thing as a funeral industry. Okay, so you got to talk to the place, make sure they're ready to work with you. If a place is giving you a difficult time, you could always contact me. If you're planning to have a home funeral, it's very good to let your local Office of Vital Statistics know in advance as well. They're actually on your side. Their handbook tells them to help families who want to have a home funeral. And they may not even know it's in the handbook, but you could always refer them to the handbook and then they can see it. It's right in the handbook. They're supposed to help families have home funerals. But, it's good to let them know in advance. Our local Office of Vital Statistics here in Alachua County, Gainesville, the woman who's in charge, Wendy Simpson, has bent over backwards innumerable times to help families, including coming in on weekends when the office was closed to do the paperwork so people could get their burial done instead of having to wait until after the weekend. So it's a real asset to develop a relationship with your local Office of Vital Statistics. And the Chief Deputy Registrar is the title of the person in charge of the office. Another other thing I want to say is about how long the body can be at home if the body's at home. Legally, If a person dies, as long as they're buried within 24 hours, nothing has to be done in terms of refrigeration. However, if the person is going to be at home or someplace for more than 24 hours after they passed, then refrigeration has to be employed. And in the old days, it was done with dry ice, and dry ice is still totally viable way of doing it, but it's a little more difficult. You got to find a place that sells it. You got to transport it. You got to worry about not getting burns, and it gives off CO2 in a room. So there's something better, and that's called Techni Ice. And Techni Ice is something that you can buy online. It comes in big sheets like that. It's flat when you buy it, and it's delivered flat. But when you get it, you put it in water and it puffs up. It becomes, much thicker. And then you take it and you put it in the freezer. It's like a high-tech gel pack. And what we do now, we have a dozen of them, and we used to loan them out to people, to families, because they're reusable. And then after they didn't need them, they return them, and the next family would use it too. Obviously, with the pandemic now, we're not doing that. But they're very inexpensive. I think a dozen of these sheets cost maybe about $30 or $40. And you can get them online. It's called Techni Ice, TECHNI-ICE. And there are other versions of it. I can't attest to the quality. This is the original, and I know it's good, Techni Ice. It has the same thermal characteristics as dry ice. So it's not just another thermal gel pack. It actually has the same, so it keeps the body colder much longer. And by having a dozen of them, you use 6 on the body and 6 stay in the freezer. And every once in a while, when you need to, you switch them out. Maybe more so in the beginning, but once the body gets cold, you don't have to even switch them that often because the cold stays in. When you have a body in the home and you're trying to keep it cold, you put these, they're puffed up, you put them in a pillowcase so it doesn't give a skin burn, and you put them just on the torso and the head, but you don't have to worry about the arms and legs. It's just the torso where you have to worry about the tissue breaking down, decomposing too soon. And then you put like blanket or something over the whole thing, so that keeps the cold in and helps keep the person cold. And of course, it's a good idea to keep the air conditioning in the house as cold as possible as well. And doing it that way, that's more than, if it's more than 24 hours, and that's good up to 3 days. You can keep the body at home for 3 days using that legally. Final Friends does all this for free. And one of the reasons we do it for free is because it's a public service. But the other reason we do it for free is if we charged a penny for anything we do, we would be practicing like a funeral director without a license. And we'd be in jail or whatever they do to you. But so the way to avoid having any legal problems in a home funeral is there has to be no money involved, at least in the home funeral part of it. And that's why you would never want to be the funeral director for somebody. That would make you probably in a funny position legally. But if it's a family member or a friend, a close friend of the family, and they're the ones who are the acting funeral director, then even if you're giving them advice, if you're not charging for that advice, then then you should be legally fine to help a family have a home funeral. And with that, I'm ready to take questions.
Where can bodies be buried in the state of Florida?
Okay. Well, I mean, any cemetery. But do you mean a particular kind of burial?
What about backyards?
Okay, yes, backyard is allowed. The issue with the backyard is it complicates the sale of the property. You can't sell the land where the body is buried. So there has to be an easement if you sell the property. So that makes it more suitable for like a family homestead where the land is passed from generation to generation. It's good for that. But you know, if you're living in a home and you get buried in the backyard and then they're going to want to sell a house, you know, it can still be done, but it creates a little bit of a legal problem. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure.
Yes.
I think there's something about you have to have a certain amount of acreage and your cemetery has to be 2 acres or less, or I don't know, there's certain measurements and certain restrictions, but it is, my daughter knows somebody who was buried, who buried their son in their home yard and created a little cemetery around there. And so that's something I'd like to learn more about.
I lived in Maryland. You couldn't bury anybody within 300 feet of a water source. Is there any of those kind of restrictions here in Florida?
There might be. I'm sure there would be. Also, if you live in a subdivision, the subdivision might not allow it. And but you know,
I think there has.
You'd have to check. You know, that would be something you'd have to check with the local.
Okay, I can check.
And the thing is, I think there's a certain amount of land, it has to be a minimum of, say, a couple of acres or something. But I went to code enforcement and he knew nothing. And he said no one had ever asked him that question. So he just didn't know any of that. Even that's Gainesville City Code Enforcement. So, you know, in the process of all this, we may end up educating people who are supposed to know the stuff because they have to look it up.
So another, I told you about how we had to educate Shans about legal rights. Unfortunately, we also had to educate the Gainesville Police Department and the Alachua County Sheriff's Department because, you know, they did not know what people's legal rights. And we actually had an incident, an unfortunate incident where a man died at home and his wife, they were planning on having a home funeral, but the police came and it turned into an ugly scene because the police didn't know the law. And now they do as a result of that situation, but you go outside of Alachua County again, or outside the city of Gainesville, and the local law enforcement may not know your legal rights.
I had a question from your last presentation, and that was, you kept mentioning hospice, but if you actually have a known terminal illness or at home and you have your little yellow sticker on a do not resuscitate on the wall, plus your physician has agreed to sign your death certificate, do you still need to call the police or the sheriff at the time of death?
I would say no. If you're under a doctor's care, the important thing is that you be under a doctor's care.
Yeah,
You know, so that the doctor is ready to say, they knew the person was going to die. Usually it's under a hospice umbrella, but the important thing is that there's a doctor. As a matter of fact, when you go to the Office of Vital Statistics, and you tell them you want to have a home funeral, the first thing they want to know is who the doctor is going to be, who's going to sign it. And they'll call the doctor and get verification from the doctor that he's going to be willing to do it.
Yeah, I had a situation last September. My daughter's boyfriend's son, who was 26, died. They went to watch a Gator game on TV, with his mom or something. Anyway, he died. He had had an illness since childhood, and he had been apparently, not doing everything he was supposed to do. Anyway, it was such a sudden shock to the father, the mother, the 2 sisters were all there, and at 2 a.m, and the sheriff I think this is before you arranged, that you worked it out with teaching the law enforcement about it, but they required them to call a funeral home before they would even leave the house. Because
That's what, yeah, that's what it used to say in their book. I actually have a copy of
the old one.
the old one and the new one.
Good, good, yeah. Well, thank you for that, Dennis, because it's like you're really a trailblazer in this. And so anyway, what they did was the only one that came to mind was Williams Thomas, so they called Williams Thomas, and I happened to have the price sheet for Williams Thomas in my book, and I looked it up, and I said, well, I forget how much, but your transport's going to be so and so. But then their problem was that they thought they were trapped with Williams Thomas. They didn't know that they had any options, or like, oh my God, are we going to have to pay $6,000 and whatever? And it turned out that that the crematory of affordable cremation is in the same building as Williams Thomas. So without having to pay an additional transport fee or anything, they were able to just have him cremated right there. And because money is also an issue, and people are blindsided by the thousands and thousands of dollars that are just, supposedly you just dish it out, you don't ask questions, which is why I think talking about death and planning is very important. One reason.
Okay, so a few things about money. The least expensive way is zero. That's if you donate your body. Next after that would be direct cremation. If direct cremation is an industry, a lot of different places do it, but that typically costs about $600 to $800 for everything: transportation, paperwork, cremation, the whole thing. That is the least expensive way to take care of a body, other than the free method. And next after that would be home funeral combined with burial. Well, I guess if you had home funeral combined with burial in your own land, then it would be free. So that's another way to do it for free. But if you're going to have burial, Prairie Creek is $2,000, and if you have a home funeral, so it's $2,000 then. Yeah, it's amazing how much they charge for such a simple process. It's outlandish, but most people figure that they have a monopoly and they don't have any other options when they do.
Yeah, and the thing about, not talking about it, it makes it scary and difficult. This picture behind me is, David Brush died. He was the second person to be buried at Prairie Creek Conservation Cemetery. Just as they opened in 2010, he died July 22nd. And he had a heart condition, and he had hospice at home. And we had Jane Roy help us. She was an intern, a funeral director intern at that time.
Wonderful.
And she went with my daughter, got the transport permit, got the death certificate and all that stuff. And she was getting practice with us. And so we buried him the day he died. We wrapped him in his little quilt, his little cotton covers, and put him in his little pickup truck. And, we took him there, and it was really nice. And it also, I think, prepared my children for, I'm still got to keep talking with them more and more, but that, this is something I would like. If you guys can, wrap your head around it, let's do this. But, it's kind of takes conversation after conversation. So any other questions for Dennis? In the time of COVID,
Actually, just took me a minute.
Oh.
I have a question. Just took me a second to unmute myself. I think, Dennis, I heard you say that something about we can't charge for doing a home funeral, but my hope is that I'm going to be paid to do an end-of-life doula services. Is there a point at which we can go so far in the planning and then we have to back up? Does that mean we can't attend if we would choose to because we've been charging for our services?
Well, this is a gray area.
Okay.
Which means that it's, it has to be explored. If you're charging for doula services, that's fine.
Mhm.
Um, as I said, I think you would still want somebody else to be the acting funeral director.
Absolutely.
Because legally, if your name is attached to this one and that one and that one, they're going to say you're running a business, a
Okay.
funeral business. So you don't want to give the impression that you're running a funeral business.
Okay.
And so, as I say, the way we avoid it is by not having any money involved at all.
Okay.
And we don't have an account. The funeral industry is,
Yeah. Very
I
protective.
mean, if they feel like you're stepping on their toes, they're going to come after you.
Okay.
There's a Florida funeral board, which is made up of all the leaders in the funeral industry in the state, and they're the ones who actually wrote the statutes. Bless you. And here's an interesting little tidbit just to show you. I have a copy of the Office of Vital Statistics handbook, and that's why I know they tell them to help families who want to have a home funeral. But in that little section of how to help a family have a home funeral, they have the phone number of the funeral board, and they're supposed to tell the family to call the funeral board to find out how to do it.
That's not going
So
to
the family then calls the funeral board, and I've called the funeral board that number. The first thing they tell you is it's against the law, you can't do it. And then you say, but it's not against the law. They say, well, we say it is.
Lee,
But,
if you want to say something, you're muted. I heard. Oh, okay. Yes, Mary.
Dennis, how many volunteers do you have through Final Friends, and how does one become a volunteer for Final Friends? Doulas probably are not interested in that question, but I pass it on.
How do you know we're not?
Well, to tell you the truth, Final Friends has become a little bit defunct in terms of our group because of the virus, because of the pandemic. Like, we're not doing any hands-on. And so basically all I do is talk to people on the phone, give them information, walk them through the process on the phone. I'll do the death certificate for them, which I'll either, FedEx to them, or they can come to my house and I'll hand it to them in the driveway. But, I'm doing social distancing, so I'm not doing any hands-on stuff. But, it's the knowledge of how to do it, and the paperwork is all it takes. We help with the paperwork and we supply the knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So if you email me your form about what's needed for the death certificate and anything else you have, I can forward it to our group.
Okay.
That would be great. But
Freddie Johnson at Prairie Creek called me about 10 minutes before the meeting saying that there was a woman in Orlando who wanted somebody to be buried at Prairie Creek, the person, and but they can't afford how much it costs for a funeral home to drive from Orlando to Gainesville. It's a huge amount of money.
It is. Yeah.
But if you do it in your own car, then you just gas. So all it takes is to be able to have the paperwork. So so I'll just do the paperwork and FedEx overnight it to her. She'll bring it in to the Office of Vital Statistics where she lives, get a transit permit, put the body in the car, and drive up to Gainesville.
Wow, that is such a great service.
That's perfect.
Isn't it sweet? Yeah. I just feel so much gratitude in the room for what you do, and that you're just motivated out of your inherent intelligence and sensibility to take this role in our community. And just
Right. Well, I was volunteered for the position.
by who?
Freddie Johnson.
Oh,
See,
wow.
Freddie Johnson wanted to do it, but realized
It's too much.
he would be in a legal qualm because if he both did the cemetery and home funeral.
Well, yeah, and he'd be so super busy.
Well, no, it wasn't just the busy, it's the legality of it. And he
Oh,
didn't want to
okay.
do anything that would interfere with the legality of Prairie Creek.
Right.
So he asked me if I would do it. And he happened to ask me at a good moment. So I said, yes.
Oh,
Very
yeah.
glad he did. That's-
Yeah.
You know, I didn't know what I was saying yes to when I said yes. That was back in, I guess, 2012.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Anybody else? Any other questions for Dennis? You can go to the website and just find his contact information there, ask questions, and I'll forward anything that I can. What I found on the death certificate questionnaire was a lot of really funny questions about race, and I was like, do they really ask all of those ethnicities? But
Yes, yes,
I
they
guess
do.
it's almost hard to believe, but
Right. Maybe that'll change one day, the way they do it. It's not, it doesn't look good, but that's what it is.
so,
Well, I want to thank you for sharing this with us. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah,
Glad to help.
definitely.
Thank
Me
you.
too, and I'm really impressed at your work at Shands, because I worked for Haven Hospice, but at Shands, so, and getting the police and the sheriffs hopefully on the same page, at least more on the same page than they were. So good for you, and thank you. And this has been very informative, so thank
Right.
you.
Okay, just to give you a little more detail about that, the new sheriff's brochure that every deputy has, it tells them what to do in a situation where there's a death,
Nice.
you know, and it tells them step by step. It used to say you can't leave, even if it's, even if you know there's no foul play, you can't leave until a funeral home comes. Now it says the family has a right to keep the body themselves, and a funeral home does not have to.
Hallelujah.
That is
Thank
from
you.
the sheriff.
Thank you.
Now,
Nice, yeah.
now I just want to say, we sent the same information. We sent that information that happened. We sent that to Tony Jones.
Jones.
And rather than responding and saying, oh, thank you, we'll update it, he sicked his lawyer on us. And so
Who is
his-
this?
The police chief,
Tony Jones,
Oh
yeah.
my gosh.
And the lawyer is saying it's not legal.
Uh-huh.
And we Final Friends, we have a lawyer, and we had our lawyer contact his lawyer and gave him all the information, and their lawyer never responded. And so it's a little bit not 100% clear where the Gainesville police are up to at this
Okay.
point with the whole thing.
A little
But
nebulous
certainly
with them.
certainly any deputy sheriff, if they question what family wants, they just say, look in your updated book. You'll see.
Okay,
It's
look
in
at your
the updated
instructions.
book now.
Well, we would really like to network with your, I can speak for everyone, with your group. And if we're sending out a notice about a meeting, if you could forward it to your friends, or, you know, like, let's kind of spread this thing out, because we're really getting a lot of good conversations going, and I'd like to stay in touch.
I would say if you hear of somebody that needs end-of-life doula services, we're here and we are ready to get to work.
Yeah, there's a bunch of us ready now, and with a variety of strengths and expertise. So we're growing.
Would it be helpful if we
Wonderful.
sent Dennis a file, just a quick Word file with our names and contact information?
Well, sure. I mean, Dennis, do you know, Dennis, you were in the Natural Awakenings in April, mentioned in
Yes.
Natural Awakening. So when I saw that, I contacted them, and the July issue we're in, the Lee, Liz, myself, and Anna Schwade are, so you can get that online, or I could send you the link to it, but you know, we can just share it out, share it around. That was pretty neat. And so now we're getting, yeah, so now public TV is gonna, or public media is gonna start picking up on us, and then we'll gradually, you know, more and more be known. So it's a process. It's a good one, though.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So, you know,
People
feel
have the
free
option.
to use me as a resource. anytime, feel free
Wow.
to call me or email me
Yeah.
or anything.
Yeah.
I have a
That's
lot of
great.
free time and I'm always looking for something to help keep me busy.
Great, great. So I know I have your number. Is it listed on your website as well?
No, but
Just
actually,
email.
if you email me from the website, it
Yeah.
goes to me.
Yeah, and then share phone numbers and then we can, okay,
Right.
well, why don't we do a closing circle of just one thing we appreciated or learned today here, just a recap. Who'd like to start?
I'm sorry.
I'll start. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, Liz,
No, go ahead. I was
Susan,
just going to say, all right.
Liz.
This has been very informative and very helpful. And I wish I had, as working as a hospital liaison for 4 years, I wish I had had this information sooner. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, Susan?
I was very happy to learn about the alternatives here in Florida. I was in Georgia when my husband died. He was at home. He had terminal cancer, and I called the coroner. So, there's a learning curve. Each state is a little bit different, but I was happy to learn about Florida. I was actually excited to learn that you could do home burials here. A lot of places you cannot under any circumstance do that. And I did already know about transporting the body, but this was an excellent, excellent learning opportunity. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great.
By the way, you mentioned, Florida is really a good place to be. The states where you cannot have a home funeral, that where you have to hire somebody, are Alabama, Connecticut, Illinois, Indiana, Louisiana, Michigan, Nebraska, New Jersey, and New York.
Yep.
So people say,
Ahead
how
of the
come,
curve.
New Jersey, New York, kind of like more liberal places, there, you have to hire a funeral home. And here in Florida, you don't. And it's actually, this is conservative. Conservative is the government doesn't stick their nose in my business, including a death in the family.
Great. Woohoo. Yeah. So Mary or Lee, any comments, any closing?
Well, thank you. I've got a number of really helpful details, and I can certainly attest to the fact, even though my husband died in Ohio, I was one who did find him in the morning, and the police would not leave until I had contacted the funeral home. So I thank you for all the information and for all the wonderful work that you're doing in our community. Thanks.
And I'm grateful for the presence of all the doulas in the community and the growth of this particular movement. So it's really wonderful to see you all. And also I'm deeply grateful to Final Friends for making the passage of several of my friends so much easier. And thank you, Dennis, for this presentation.
Great. Yeah, ditto to all of that. I'm just so feeling like we have such a team going on here, and all the different parts coming together. So thank you so much for your work. And I'm so glad we were able to record this and we can share it with friends. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good night.
See you soon.
See you later.